Thank you so much for staying, y'all, for the wonderful talkback that we're going to have for this hilarious and powerful show that we just saw. I'm going to take a minute to introduce our guests from Oregon State University. We have Dr. Lehui Whitebear, is an enrolled member of the Coastal Band of the Chumash Nation and the Center Director of the Oregon State University Kaku-Ixt Mana Ina Haws. How'd I do? That's good. Awesome. Thank you. And she completed her PhD spring 2020 through the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at OSU. She's also received her BS in Ethnic Studies, second BS in Anthropology, and a Master's in Interdisciplinary Studies, Women, Gender, Sexuality Studies, Ethnic Studies, and Queer Studies focus, all from OSU. She is a mother, poet, and Indigenous activist. We also have Dr. Natchee is a comparative and critical ethnic studies scholar interested in the intersections between ethnic studies, cultural geography, and Indigenous studies. Their research focuses on issues of race, space, and Indigenous geographies. Their book, Native Space, Geographic Strategies to Unsettle Settler Colonialism, illustrates the ways that Native people in North America sustain and create Indigenous geographies in settler colonial nations, and was recently awarded the Association of Ethnic Studies 2021 Outstanding Book Award. And we have Gail J Woodside as a large landscape arid land ecologist and traditional knowledge specialist. She is interested in subsistence, landscape restoration, elk behavior and movement, and creating partnerships between Western and traditional science. She is a member of the advisory board for the Native American Longhouse Kaku-Ixt Mana Ina Haws, as well as a founding member of OSU's biannual traditional knowledge conferences. Then we have our wonderful director, Robert Leff, and our amazing cast for the show. So we've got some questions that Dr. Whitebear helped us prepare to talk about the show, and then if we have enough time, because we're trying to shoot for about an hour, we'll see if y'all have any questions for us. So I'm going to get started with the first question, and we're just going to kind of pass it down the line. If you have something to add, awesome. If you don't, that's okay too, because we have an hour and we have 6 questions. So here we go. The concept of being invisible is at the center of this play. Talk about the assumptions people make both in the show and in our wider world that contribute to the invisibility of Indigenous people. What does being invisible mean in this sense? Dr. Whitebear.
Hello? Okay. I didn't know we were going in this order when I sat down. Just kidding.
So you get to be first every time.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
We'll mix it up.
Okay. So the concept of being invisible in thinking about Indigenous people is like we're here, but we're constantly erased in everything, and the way that our history is portrayed a lot of times in public education, which is making some strides, but it shouldn't be such a struggle to have our histories accurately reflected. I think about like myself when I walk around, even in Corvallis, a lot of times people don't know I'm Native. They're like, where are you from? That question with the follow-up, like, but where are you really from? Kind of follow-up questions a lot. I still get those. And I could be wearing like this shirt, or I could be wearing my Native earrings, or anything that symbolizes Indigenous people. And people still don't ever think that I'm an Indigenous person for the most part. Like if I'm around Native people, they do, and Indigenous people, but in general, there's like you walk around feeling invisible a lot in society, and it causes a lot of harm to like your own mental health sometimes. And I think that that's really important to bring up. And people make assumptions that you have to be a certain way, or that you're all from the same place or celebrate the same things a lot of the times. And so I'll keep it brief with that one to start us.
And in the vein of education, Dr. Whitebear is also one of our amazing school board members here in Corvallis, working to help with that front. Dr. Barn?
Okay. Hi. Thanks for hanging out with us. So I'm kind of fresh here, still thinking about this. You know, this is the first time I've actually watched this performance and seen the whole thing. And so, what struck me was thinking about the ways in which the the tension, the central tension is really about how do you do something that already at its foundation, right, is an act of invisibility, right, or an act of invisible making, right? And so there's an impossibility there that I think is really interesting, rather than trying to, when you're trying to weave in something that is inherently not present, right, you're stuck with this sort of the impulsibility, the sort of the irony of everything that I think they displayed so well, that ends up creating you or tying you into knots and loops, right? And you start to center and circle back and find yourself at this place of nothingness, like at the end, and that's kind of all you're ever going to be left with. And so I think about the invisibility in that sense, that it's an inevitability in this particular context. So that's what was sticking with me so far.
Okay.
Hello? Okay. Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here today. When I think about invisibility, I also think about it in politics and statistics. We are never part of the conversation. We're an afterthought. And so even in statistics, when they talk about how we are, we're basically never included in statistics. In fact, one of the statistics during the campaigning was that we were the other. Well, we're already othered. And so being the other, it was quite evident that no one really notices that we're around until there is a reason to talk with us about what they need to talk about, and then try to find a way to backpedal and get us involved. And so that's another form of erasure and invisibility in this country today and around the world. And as Lou said, people, we can wear our shirts and our earrings or make our beadwork or be in our traditional clothes, and people still don't recognize us as being Indigenous people.
Robert, themes of invisibility in the show?
Pardon?
Themes of invisibility in the show?
Okay. Yes, there is definitely. And I think because these people, the characters, also, they think, particularly Logan and Jaxton, have convinced themselves that they are woke people, and Larissa FastHorse calls part of the play is that it is about, no, I'm not, okay, in addition to the invisibleness, she is also looking at or bringing up this whole idea of performative wokeness, that these characters want to do good or to listen to the voices. Part of it is they have no authentic voices to listen to, but they want to make change, but they don't want to do the heavy lifting to make the change. And that, I think, is also part of the play, is, sure, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to be sensitive. And they're stuck. They can't, I mean, what they really should have done is say, okay, we don't have a native actor, so we won't do the show. But no, they keep trying and trying and trying. And it's, I guess, it's futile. I mean, it ends up with this absurd idea that nothingness, doing nothing, is going to solve any issues, and it doesn't. We're just left with a circle in the middle of the room.
Actors, how are y'all feeling about kind of as you explored the concept of invisibility in the show?
I think for my character, Caden, he's the history guy. He knows all the history. He's studied it. But he can't convince the other people he's working with to listen even to it. And do something with it. You know, he has all the ideas, it's in front of us, but we can't make it work. And you know, whether they tried hard enough or not is, you know, to be debated, but it's probably not. But it's, you know, he has everything, but couldn't get it there, which was tough. Yeah.
For Logan, like, for example, when, like, I feel like she definitely felt like she had the performativeness going, where she did feel like she was farther ahead than most people, yet, you know, the fact that she said, well, none applied, you know, kind of like, I don't know any. Well, there you go. Does she really not know any, or she just doesn't know that she knows someone that is Native American? And also, none applied. Did she have the auditions or the notices out in areas where it would be available and accessible for them to know? You know, instead kind of made it feel like, oh, this is on me, you know, to do the work, and they didn't come to me, you know, instead of her making it available.
With the invisibility, I'm going to piggyback off that a little bit. And especially the performative, like, progression of themselves, I guess. With that, they circle so much on how they can benefit from it, that I think that's a big point that gets highlighted, is because essentially they want to put on this Native American show. They got a Native American actor. How great are they gonna, like, seem to the school board and all of these other things, only to have it be like, no. So, and then after that, I think is where the spiral comes in. I got off subject, sorry.
You're right there. With Jaxton, he has a lot of information, a lot of knowledge. He feels woke. You know, he thinks that he sees the invisible. You know, I see the trees and the forest and everything. But, I mean, the irony, he talks about IKEA and mailing away, and what are we doing? We're mailing away for an Indigenous actor when we're in a country that's peopled with Indigenous people that were here before the white actors that are in the room, you know, versus going out into the community. You know, it's been said, we're just gonna go buy something on Amazon and have it come. And then we're shocked that it's not what, you know, we thought it was. But again, for Jaxton, he wants to be there and see it, but he can't, you know. He can't get out of his own head to actually do the work.
Yes, Robert. I want to add one thing. The section, the little scene between Logan and Jaxton talking about, I don't know any Native American actors, no one has applied. That, from all the interviews I've seen and read with Ms. FastHorse, that is directly what was said to her. She has written a number of plays. She sent them out to theaters, and they've said, oh, we love your play, but we don't know there are no Native American actors around here, so we can't do the play. And that is one of the reasons she wrote this play, saying, oh, okay, I'm gonna write you a play with no Indigenous people in it. All her other plays, by the way, have Indigenous characters. So this is kind of an anomaly in her among her plays.
I wanted to add another thing to think about. Invisibility or visibility aren't necessarily binaries either, right? So I'm thinking specifically about art. So a lot of the work I do is centered around art like installation art, for example, and around geography. And for example, I work with the Confederate Tribes of Grand Ronde, and they are really interested in facilitating and promoting their Columbia River style art. And it's something that is made invisible even within the acceptance of what we call, or people think of as, Pacific Northwest styles of art, which actually are, they cut me off, are actually a larger and more northern style. And so even when you have this sort of regional recognition of an authentic, quote unquote, artistic practice and style and culture, it erases the more localized and sort of regional and different practices within that. So, that they become invisibilized even within that set, that culture, that style, that history gets erased, even as folks are recognizing Pacific Northwest, what would be Northern Pacific Northwest styles.
Yeah, I think that was one of the really striking things about the show as a person who's been managing this theater for 7 years now. And over the last 3, we've been working specifically on diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of the conversations I have with directors is sort of, you're asking us to do these shows, you're asking us to, have these parts, but we don't know any actors from those communities. They don't exist here in our community. And so that's definitely, one of the things that we're trying to do with our shows is the pre-work. The real work is connecting the theater and myself and our diversity council to the communities first, and serving them and saying, what do you need? What can our facility do for you? Before we even ask, do you want to do plays with us? Do you want to act in our shows that have, characters from your community, or just act in our shows? Not just have us call you every time we need a Black actor or a Native American actor or an Indian actor and those sorts of things. And so that's been a lot of the work that's been happening despite the pandemic over the past 2-3 years, has been just connecting with wonderful folks like Lou and some of the other cultural centers and other organizations here in the community to just make those ties to where we have that relationship before, and instead of just sort of being like, oh, we need to check this box that we're serving your community, so come do something and or come be in our show. So the next question, this play is really funny, as we heard from all the laughter that y'all evoked from our audience. The use of native humor is something that can make people in the audience really uncomfortable. They don't know if it's okay to laugh. Can you talk about the healing power of laughter and native humor in the context of this play? And how will we start backwards? We'll start with the actors this time. So native humor and the power of laughter in the context of this play. Go, Nick.
So laughing when you feel awkward and on the spot sometimes, and whether or not you should be laughing at that. Yeah. I think that in the right setting, in the right context, where you can have a group of people together where we understand that these are truths. I mean, as Robert told us when we were starting the play, 80-90% of the things in here were things said to Larissa FastHorse, and so it realize this is stuff that is said on a regular basis. These are songs that are taught to kids. I mean, some of us remember them. It's really uncomfortable now, especially when we're talking about it, but at the same time, in this setting where we can do it in a mixed group, where we can do it with the understanding that, okay, we have to see this, we have to admit it, but the humor element can be healing in that. And hopefully we can find that healing together and come together more than laughing at the other, which is usually how the humor has been used in the past, especially in theater. The other has always been the point of mockery. And so I think in this play in particular, she's giving us that grace, that moment where we can. And hopefully that healing can then transcend outside the theater doors.
I definitely think that the laughter helps break certain tensions and kind of gives a leeway, like a wiggle room into having the conversation. And with this play and the humor in the play, there's a nuance to it where you can tell it is written by somebody who has experienced that, and it's presenting it and giving it back in a way where it's like, let's acknowledge this, let's talk about it, but it doesn't have to be this whole big thing at the moment when we're talking about it until it sinks in.
I agree. And I also think that I found knowing that this is how it was written and this is how it was meant for us to deliver it, it made it feel like maybe we were going to grab people's attention more and maybe make them remember what they're hearing more, and they'll think it's funny, and they might be like, wait, I've said that or I've thought that before, and we're all laughing together, and they are going to turn around right then. Like, this is a moment for them to hopefully have their awakening on a lot of even like the microaggressions or the tiny things that they wouldn't even have thought of, especially maybe just celebrating Thanksgiving the other day, of what they might, and now they know and they've learned, and we laugh together, and I hope that that's what they take from here on.
The first time we did the read-through of this, we didn't know what to expect. And we're reading it and we're hitting some of these, what is now, we realize are really funny jokes. And we're all sitting sort of staring at each other and going, ooh, can we say that, Robert? and he's like, he kind of gave us the actor's immunity, Yes, you can do the bit with the heads. Yes, you can do the, you're so wise. I bet, are you sure you're not Native American? I mean, we've read that and went, whoa. I mean, can we really do that? And, yes, we can. And it took a lot of practice, a lot of getting used to it. And that was hard, I think, for us to be comfortable, doing some of these lines without, flinching on them.
And I think it's important also to talk about, there was work to create that permission. We worked with the Majestic Theater Diversity Council almost 2 years before this play was produced. We worked with Dr. Whitebear to, look at the show and say, like, is this harmful? Like, where, and we have a question about this later, but just like, is this going to create more than it potentially harms? And so that was kind of the pre-work, the work that we had to do before we could even then say to the actors, yes, you can do this. Because I think it's important to when you're working with a show that's especially about a particular community, you have to go to that community and say, is this something you want done? Is this something that actually is relevant and makes sense to your community? And if that answer isn't yes, and an enthusiastic yes, then me as a venue manager, you shouldn't do that show. And so that's kind of the work that we've started doing over the past 3 years. And this show, everyone was excited about. They're just like, yeah, no, do this show. I think it's good for a theater that's, especially a theater that's engaging in DEI work, to have this mirror held up to itself.
One of the things that Larissa FastHorse has said is that she wants you to question and to think, question what you've been taught. Growing up, she grew up in South Dakota, and she, Thanksgiving was a day for her family to get together. She wasn't told about the so-called story, of Thanksgiving. So when she started doing research for the play, she was shocked at what she found. So she wants people to leave the theater and think. Not that you see the show and laugh and go, okay, I got it, and I'm good to go. No, you've got to do the hard work. She has another play that she says is kind of the flip of Thanksgiving play called What Would Crazy Horse Do? And in that, it involves two Native, a brother and sister, they're twins. They're members of a fictitious tribe, and they've just buried their grandfather, so they are the last two members, and they are thinking about committing suicide. And there's a knock on their door of where they live, and there are two white people come in, and they want to see the grandfather, and they say, well, we just buried him. Why do you want to see him? Oh, we're members of the Klan, And we want to celebrate the 50th anniversary of a powwow that that the Klan sponsored. And it's based, that really did happen. And she was very surprised to see a poster for that in a museum. And in one early interview with her I saw is theaters are terrified of that play. They won't do it because of it's much grimmer. It's funny, but it's much grimmer. The other thing, I don't know if I kind of want to sneak this in, is there are many, many playwrights, Native American playwrights, who work we should be doing. One of the things I was asked is, what gives you as a white person permission to do this play? And my answer was, well, the play, a lot of directors are white. That's not an excuse, but I was very sensitive to everything about the play and said, okay, about the heads, how are we going to do that so it isn't going to upset people? But they're plays by Native playwrights that I'll support. I say, let's do them. I'll come and see them, but I'm not the person to direct them because I won't know the little, the nuances in the play. And so with Thanksgiving play, I felt comfortable enough that she's poking fun at white people.
You need a dramaturg.
Oh, the unknown. No one knows what that is.
Gail, Native humor and the power of laughter?
Sure. As being one of the Indian kids in the room in public school in Wyoming, singing 1 little, 2 little, 3 little Indians was just totally impulsive to me. It repulsed me, and I wouldn't do it. And I got into a lot of trouble going through school. But anyway, I think that we need to really understand Indigenous humor is also based on dark humor. It's the only way we were able to survive. So in our family, my dad had a whole bunch of little sayings when things got kind of tough, or my grandfather, and they would blurt them out, and it would like jar us into the reality of how absurd all of this is, and then how funny it is in a kind of a dark kind of way. And he always used to tell us kids that, you know, you're done when you can't laugh anymore at all the absurdity. And so we would work really hard in our house to make things humorous and funny, even though it was absolutely repulsive, and turn it around just to be able to move forward and know that we had a voice and a life, and that a lot of this stuff that was handed out to us was kind of made up by people of position and power, and that our only way to overcome it was to laugh. And so that's what I see in those crazy songs you were singing. It took me right back to kindergarten. It was pretty good.
Yeah, I would add, though, that humor, I've always thought of within Native sort of cultures and practices and traditions as humor as a really fundamental tool of critical thinking. And I think that's true of all of us, but I think it's a much more acknowledged and sort of upfront one in a lot of Native communities, so much so that it's built into ceremonial practices oftentimes. It's built into sort of cultural practices that you wouldn't think, like you can't imagine the Pope, right, cracking a lewd joke in the middle of some Catholic ceremony. But this could happen in some traditions, right? And not everyone, obviously, we're talking about lots of different cultures, but those practices and that tool, the humor as a tool, and I think we still use it. I mean, this is the value of comedy generally, is it really makes you sort of analyze those edges and think about those difficult spaces and imagine possibilities, and sometimes step over those lines, which obviously the characters are so fearful of stepping over. And then there's also this element of this whole play. It's almost, there was this line about the ventriloquist doll, right? Here we have a Native playwright ventriloquizing these white actors in white scenarios. And there's something, to me, very funny in a native humor way just of that, right? So reading it and listening to it from that angle is really important. So I would put all that in there as part of native humor informing what is actually happening within this space and this story.
Yeah, I think a lot of what I would say has been said. It's just like part of a lot of Native communities and culture is like that ability to laugh and heal, because especially in the context of this play, like what's being presented and just trying to work through continuing to live with settler colonialism, because it's not like that's gone away. We continue to live with it every single day, and it has a heavy presence, and we're, as we said earlier, erase so much every day, that having that ability to still laugh and to still be alive and to enjoy life is really important, because they can't take that away from us, right? We have to be able to still laugh, and the absurdity of some of it is that laughter piece really emphasizes it, and it's like, this is so ridiculous, I can't believe it's still happening, right? And so I use a lot of native humor clips in some of my classes at OSU too, and there's always students that are like, I don't know if I should laugh, and so I like, it's okay to laugh is usually, and that's like the 1491s, that comedy group, that's their big thing too. It's like, it's okay to laugh, and you should, because it's healing and it helps remind you that there's still joy in life, and sometimes all you can do is laugh at these attempts to silence us and to erase us and to make us invisible and try to basically make us not present in all things. And so one way to kind of clap back at that is to laugh at it and be like, we're still here. You tried, but no.
Reminds me of a line from Hedwig and the Angry Inch, where he's like, you know, I laugh because I will cry if I don't. This play has a scene in which actors throw around props that are meant to be the heads of Indigenous people. The playwright specifically crafted this moment to make the audience very uncomfortable. What was your reaction to this scene? What feelings or memories did it evoke in you?
Yeah, that was I was like, it's probably, I remember when we talked about this before in the rehearsal and everything, and I was like, I get why you would be uncomfortable to do it, and that was one of my other things too, is like, I understand this can be uncomfortable to present, but like try to ask yourself why it's uncomfortable and what's making it uncomfortable for you, because like for Indigenous people, we have to deal with seeing this all the time in ways that isn't as present for folk that don't experience it personally. And so it reminded me when I first or even when I first heard about it, they didn't even have the heads at that point. When I first heard about it, it reminded me of the way mascots are used, and the way that a lot of times you'll see sports fans with like actual like heads of people on stakes, like especially against like the Chiefs and other teams like that. And so it really reminded me of the way that mascots are used, and that way that genocide is made to be a joke or made to be a way to celebrate whatever's going on, if it's sportsmanship or any other thing. And so we deal with it all the time with that. We deal with it with Halloween costumes, with people showing up as basically dead Indians, and you see it all over the place. Okay. So, and it's really present here in our local community, where we have something we would like to present to the community that's local, that's really connected to this. And as you all know, it's Native American Heritage Month, or hopefully you know that, especially after watching this play. And also, Friday was declared National Native American Heritage Day by the president earlier in the month as well. And the Gazette-Times here in Corvallis decided to run a crossword puzzle, actually, on Friday of all days, that the clue was Frontier Trophy. And any guesses to what the answer was? Yeah, it was scalp. Did somebody see my Facebook? Just kidding. And I really wanted to thank Gail for bringing that up, and so we can share as a community that that's still present. Like the use of Native genocide and death is used as a form of entertainment, And it was really insensitive for it to come out at any time, but especially on that day, especially this month, in a local community that tries to like say like we're getting there, we are getting there, but we're definitely not there if that's running in the local paper. And so it's really harmful. I put it on my public-facing social media if anybody's interested in seeing what I shared about it, but the reasons why that's not appropriate, the way that body parts have been used as trophies, as was mentioned in the play as well. And so I'll leave it at that and say it shows up all the time for us in film, in sports, and even in crossword puzzles.
Yeah, it was a pretty eye-opening experience. My brain is getting older, so every morning I do the crossword puzzle and the Gazette Times. Yep, yippee for me, right? And I'm sitting there, and of course I know I don't have all the answers, right? And I'm like putting them in, and all of a sudden I realize this says scalp. What? I'm thinking it's Annie Oakley, shooting or something in the good old frontier West, and it was like, I was shocked. And of course, it was like, I know the Gazette Times isn't directly responsible for the person who wrote that, put together that crossword puzzle, but the person who did write it knew exactly what they were doing. And it is not funny. And I really want to thank Lou and the Indigenous community for helping me through that post-traumatic stress disorder moment for me. But it was quite an eye-opener in today's world. It was really unexpected, and it was very present and hanging heavy in the universe that day. Yeah.
Natchee, anything to add?
I don't know what to add on top of that, but I think the general feeling I got was just, this is kind of like what we're hearing here. This is a regular thing. This is not unusual, actually. If you're looking and listening, you see it. And sometimes I can see how someone who would take this example and explain it in a particular way. But if you really explain it thoroughly, you can't help but not go to this conclusion, right? So if you start defining what is a frontier, or whose perspective is a frontier constructed out of, like what are the implications of who exists and where in those places, it only leads you to one place. And so it gets so deep in that down that sort of track, that foundation of knowledge of what exists and what doesn't and what becomes okay, that it shows up in lots of minute ways that people would kind of brush off. But that's also why they show up everywhere and all the time, constantly. It's a barrage. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. Right? That's just the reality of it. So when I see it, it's just like, yeah, there's another one. Yeah, toss some heads around, right? I mean, they were originally on pikes, right? And they were put on display, and that was, it's a carryover from European traditions, but in the Americas, it gets racialized and it gets sort of dispensed onto particular bodies for particular reasons, with particular outcomes attached to them. And so, there you go.
I'll add on to that, even something that may seem as small as a crossword puzzle, it's really not that small, honestly, but something like that or anything else that you should be as appalling as seeing the heads bounced around though, right? Like, that's why she put that forward, is like, this should make people uncomfortable. It is kind of funny for Native people in some ways, but to see the absurdity of it, but it should be also appalling at the same time. And so even something that may seem small should still not be acceptable.
Yeah, and it's important to show that, because a lot of people in the United States of America and beyond have no idea what really happened. I teach difference, power, and discrimination classes in Indigenous agriculture and natural resource management. And the lessons are not easy in my class. And, they were kicked around, they were put on poles. This celebration didn't have anything to do with camaraderie and friendship, And so it's important that is shocking in this play, but it also needs to be done and represented. And then the humor comes back, the dark humor comes back to kind of give the mind of the audience a chance to process it. And then even though the songs are still in your face in a certain way, they're important because it brings a little bit of humor back, even though it's a very serious issue. Helps people deal with the truth.
Robert,
Um,
how'd that scene go for you?
Well, I saw the first fully mounted production of this play. This play was, the word is escaped me. It was, anyway, commissioned by Artist Repertory Theater in Portland and Playwrights Horizon in New York. And when I saw it, I went, oh, I mean, I just gasped when I saw it. So I knew that this was going to be, potentially upsetting to audience members. But as I've said over and over again, I'm not, as a director, I don't set out to belittle people or harm. I try very hard not to harm. I mean, I might be because I'm not aware of it, and I'm willing to, if someone calls it to my attention, I will go. I'll sit and stop and think, oh, okay, I will look for it from their point of view, not from my point of view. The other thing, there is a thing that really shocked me that I was not aware of, is in Home on the Range, the part that Pat sings about the Indians have been pressed from this part of the West. And I thought, really? Is that really in the song? So I Googled and did a Wikipedia, and it's not in the original poem that was set to music, which is now the state song of Kansas. But what I found is that it first appeared in a collection by a man named John Lomax, and he published it in 1910, and that's where the lyric appears. And then on YouTube, I found a recording from, I think, 1925 or 1929, and it's a nice, upbeat version of Home on the Range, and suddenly those lyrics, and I went, oh, shit. And
We'll bleep that.
Pardon? You'll delete the...
I said we'll bleep that.
I'm sorry.
We're filming this.
Oh, darn.
Oh, darn.
Shucky darns.
But when Sinatra recorded it, it wasn't there.
Right. Actors?
Yeah, for me, I think the
As
head
the people
scene
who
was,
actually did that scene?
yeah, I think the head scene was probably the hardest one to do. I mean, we talked about it during rehearsal and everything, and how are we going to do this, and what props are we going to use to make it work? And Robert had the idea, let's use foam heads, and it's like, okay. And it wasn't, I think, until we saw the finished product, the finished prop with the paint, and Robert pulled it out of the bag. We all gasped. It was the air got sucked out of this room. It was like, oh my gosh, like, I hate to say it, but nice job to the props person. I mean, it was exactly what we needed, but it gave us second thought of, whoa. I mean, yes, we've rehearsed this, 6, 7, 8 times already, but this is different. How do we do this differently? And even then, I think since then, we've probably done that scene with fight choreography and everything else, probably 20 times since now. It's still not easy. It's taken a lot to kind of, I hate to say numb yourself to it, but we did kind of have to, okay, we're just going to do it like we did it last time. And, the reaction from the audience, I mean, we get the same reaction. It's shock. Of, oh my gosh, but oh my gosh, did they really do that? And yeah, it's a good shock, in my opinion.
I think for my character, I felt relieved because my character gets to be appalled and upset. And then at the same time, is she being even worse and more damaging by saying, we can't do this. We have to hide the fact that any of this happened. And like, that's not a proper celebration. And she was erasing, and which is appalling. But it was definitely hard, but I knew that is what we were supposed to do, and make it work.
It was uncomfortable like the first few times, because before we got the heads, we just had these like regular like foam mannequins, and then they got the paint job, and it was like, ooh. Yeah. In my opinion, there kind of was like an aspect of like, I totally understood like why Larissa put this in the play and like what the reaction was going to be, and just like why it kind of had to be in there, just from the perspective of like a person of color. Definitely not the same, but there's a kinship there, because I've definitely seen my fair share of like pretty morbid jokes. So, yeah.
And I think for us as actors in general, specifically with the heads, but with all of the humor, was getting past that personal discomfort to really honor what Miss FastHorse was trying to do with the whole darn play and perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to take the ego out of it, because there's something bigger at stake. And one of the notes that we got a few times with the head scene was, okay, great, you've got the choreography done, you look like you're acting. Oh, okay. You need to look like it's fun, you need to punt it, you need to make the happy noise, you need to get beyond again. And so, as Pat had said, we'd anesthetized ourselves to it. Well, no, you need to be in that moment. You need to sit in that moment just as the audience has to do the same. And you need to do it well enough so the audience gets to feel that visceral feeling, because otherwise we haven't honored the play at all, or the point.
Thank you, y'all. I'm going to change up the order of the questions, because I think this one makes sense following the other one. I'm going to jump to question 5. The inappropriate woke behaviors in this show are based upon real life examples that Larissa FastHorse saw on Pinterest and other websites and Facebook posts about how to honor Native American Heritage Month and the Thanksgiving story. At what point is displaying this behavior, even while satirizing it, harmful? Where is the line between a cautionary tale and glorification? Start with Dr. Whitebear again.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was like, I forgot. I helped write that. But I think it's important because we were talking about Native humor and everything, but that doesn't mean like people should just make jokes about genocide and Indigenous experiences. And it was really based in her perspective as an Indigenous person and her reaction to all these things. And so I think that's one of the most important cautionary tale pieces, is like non-Indigenous folk can't just like be like, oh, I'm going to make fun of something now and call it Native humor, because that's not actually how it works. And you have to have that connection to the experience of it to understand like what pieces of it are we pulling out to highlight and to satirize. And so I think that's like the cautionary tale piece, is that it's not something that just anybody can necessarily do. But there is that part where it's okay to laugh part still, right, when it is being satirized. And so I think that that can almost glorify it and be like, oh, we can just make everything about genocide funny and call it good, and that's the way we'll teach about it now, when that's not really, I don't think, what she was trying to present. She was trying to bring it in a particular way to the audience, so they can relate to it, react to it, and especially Indigenous folk, because I think there was something written too where she said that part is where Native people laugh the most at too, right? And so sort of knowing the audience and stuff like that. But yeah, that's what I'd say, the cautionary tale part.
I don't have the answer to that exactly, but I do think one of the ways you take power from things is by exposing it to the extent that you can't see it any other way except as, the construction that it is, the sort of performance that it is. And that can be helpful. That can often be helpful as a way to sort of denaturalize something. And so there's a power there. But there is a, even now, there is a tendency toward this performance in a way that if you perform the thing in a parody way, that somehow that you stripped it away, and then it becomes, as the question indicates, just a replication of the same thing. And that happens quite a bit, actually. I think a lot of people use that as a technique of evasion. Right? It's an easier, simpler way to get at something really difficult by saying, look, I can do this in this way, and therefore I can now step away from it. And there's an allure to that for sure. And so I don't know where the line is, and I think that's the big question. Like that's always the question. Where does that line break? When does it just become more harm? And maybe there isn't a simple answer, but it's the one we should always be asking, I think.
Gail?
I really don't have anything else to add. I thought it's a hard question to answer. And thank you for all of the hard work you did when you went through processing this play. I appreciate it.
Robert? Where do you think the line is?
Pardon?
Where do you think the line is?
Well, part of my overly optimistic personality, it would be nice if there was a day where we don't have to do the Thanksgiving play anymore. And also, I know I've said this before, but I will repeat it, is there are many, many playwrights, Native American playwrights or Indigenous playwrights, that you should know and should be done. The month that I saw this play in Portland at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, I had seen a play by Mary Catherine Nagel called Mannahatta, which is a whole different story. There is humor in it, but not as much as this show. And I also saw a one-woman show by Delana Studi called And So We Walked at Portland Center Stage. And what was remarkable about, they were all different, they were all terrific shows, and it was the first, to have 3 plays by 3 Native women playwrights being done in this state was, was kind of historical. But I think we need just to do more plays by Native playwrights. I mean, Thompson Highway, and William S. Yellow Robe, and Diane Glancy, and a whole host of people out there that a lot of people don't know. And I think we need to do those because they tell us stories that we don't know as an audience. I also would slip in that not every, and I might be overstepping this, but these playwrights should be looked upon as individuals rather than, oh, this is a Native American play, so, we're good to go. No. It's to know, oh, okay, this is this person, this is how they write, but that doesn't mean that all Native playwrights or authors or poets, there's a wide variety.
Thank you, Robert. Actors?
Where do you draw the line on humor sometimes? It's, that's tough. I mean, your own personal life, the line is a lot closer to you than it is when you're on stage. yeah, we all had to step out of our comfort zone with this play. I mean, had to. The play demanded that we do it. And it was tough. I mean, you know, it's funny when you read it, but it's still, you know, what is, you know, if I do this, what are people going to think of me? Not, you know, my character, but me as a person. You know, that I even agreed to do this play, and I'm saying these awful things on stage. And, you know, that's a hard line, you know, for a play like this.
We can move on down.
I think a line being crossed for this one would be, this would definitely be a very easy play for somebody to just take and be like, oh my gosh, this is so funny, completely miss the point, and then just keep pushing forward. And I think that would be where a full line would be drawn, if just everything about it, like the stuff she puts, if it just started going over the people producing its head, because then they perform it, an audience comes, and then it goes right to them, and
Making a pastiche of it instead of actually taking it for something that could be transformative or healing. I think talking to the local group, and if, you know, in this one, and your local Indigenous community, to see how they feel about it, like we've talked about, make sure it's welcoming, make sure that that might be a moment that it can be used. Maybe it's not the right moment, you know, and as a white person in this play, I wouldn't be able to answer that question. So going out and asking the question, you know, I think and that goes for any group, community, if we need to be okay going out and asking, because what is humorous to one is not to another, and even if it's humorous to all, maybe that's not the right time for it, you know.
I can't hear you, Robert. I can't hear you, Robert.
I was going to say, are we going to let the audience ask questions?
Yes, we totally will. Yep. So for me as a venue manager, the line is where the community involved says it is. So that's one of the things that white folks, especially white folks in power, especially white males in power, aren't good at doing, is listening to people and actually listening to people, especially when someone says no. And so that's something that over the past 3 years, in talking to wonderful people of color, especially women of color, the thing that they asked me to do is actually listen to people. And so for me, the line is where the Indigenous community that we talk to before doing this show says it is. And so I think that's something for people who are meditating, engaging works like this is, you know, you have to talk to the communities involved and you have to listen to them. You can't talk to them and then ignore what they say. And so that's a hard thing to do when you've been taught your whole life that your opinion is the one that matters the most. And so it takes a lot of humility and giving up power to do the right thing, I think, in our community. Last question, and then we'll check and see if y'all have any questions. This play is the most popular, most produced work from Larissa FastHorse. It has no Indigenous characters in it. Why do you think a story that centers whiteness in the absence of Indigenous characters is so popular, actors?
Reading about what Ms. FastHorse was trying to do with it and her reactions to the play from Indigenous groups and how they were the ones who would laugh most uproariously about it and whatnot, I think it's a wonderful moment to take a play that's got only white people and recenter it and suddenly give the Thanksgiving play in a Thanksgiving time a Indigenous focus. Like, this is a play specifically that may really just jive with this one group, and it can be for them in a time that traditionally, historically, ongoingly is, you know, a time of mourning, a time of cultural disaster. You know, and I think that it's an interesting twist and a way to really alter the whole white power-centric focus on this holiday, you know, and give the Native voice a time to laugh and cry and be there and, you know, maybe be easier to interact with for a white audience. Maybe that will make change.
I also think that. I would probably suggest it probably has something to do with the fact that it is an entire cast of like white people, and it's they're being like fake woke, but there's also an aspect of like, it seems like it would be really easy for some, like what I was going off earlier, like for somebody to take it and be like, I'm so woke, I'm doing this play too. Like I'm doing this play, and then it would kind of become a performance of itself, which is my guess. And then also Larissa's whole commentary on the like, we can't find any like Native American actors, probably.
Yeah, she made it easy on them to be able to cast it. And like they didn't have to maybe do as much of the work. I think that there's an example in the play where Logan gets to be in charge and gets to have all these grants, and she gets to make the decision. Why does she get to decide on the better of the school system? You know, instead she should not be the one that is in that position at all, but a lot of times that's what it is. That person is in the position to make those choices, and this is an easy out for people. I think it's wonderful to get her play featured, but she had to do it. She had to make it this way to make it accessible to these people so they could take the easy way.
Right. Robert made a comment to us several times during rehearsal, especially where we were struggling in one part or another, and he said, the script will bring you up to where you need to be. You got to trust the script. You got to trust that what is written was written for white people for a reason. So just let the script bring you up to that level. And I think that was a very helpful statement that Robert gave us several times during this rehearsal, where, the lifting was done for us, and we just had to trust that heavy lifting was done, and we could just use it.
I've read her comment and heard her say this, that this is her most depressing success. The question perhaps to ask those theaters, okay, what other plays by Native playwrights are you doing? Are you doing any? Is this to do this to just check the box? The other thing that she has said about the play is she is able to, with this play, even though there are no Indigenous characters, she's been able to slip some of her concerns into, and things that she wants to write about and talk about, into the play. One of the things that she does, I've read other plays by her. One wonderful play called Teaching Disco Square Dancing to Your Elders, a Class Presentation.
Great title.
Right?
Great title.
Big title with 4 characters, no white people. Anyhow, what was I going to say? So one of her techniques as a playwright is that she will get you laughing about something and then will slip something in that she wants you to pay attention to. and you go, oh, okay. So she gets you in a laughing place, and then she zings it in, like the scene between Logan and Alicia, and you're kind of laughing at the hair flip and other things, and then when Logan says, "Oh, you're so wise. Are you sure you're not native?" And wow, that's the kick. And so that's the way she writes her plays.
Gail, why do you think this is the most produced FastHorse play?
Well, in the context that it's written in, which is around Thanksgiving, and all of the untruth around the myth of Thanksgiving, having an all-white stage presence is also a lesson in how to handle the myth and straighten it out. And so it takes the privilege and kind of turns it on its ear and brings it back around to a process of learning and doing and identifying and realization. And it lowers, I think, the level of the expectation of the hierarchy of classism in a lot of ways. And so to me, that's kind of the idea that I got out of it. And it's a pretty interesting way of doing it, but it's I think it's a way of learning, and I think she taught the lesson really well.
All right, quickly. It knows that myth is more important than anything else. Thanksgiving, the myth, you get into the flow and you're in. The Alamo, it has the historical significance is nil. The myth is everything, and this is true here as well. So I think that's why I also think, despite the content in some ways, there's the hope or the promise possibly that there's something there that you'll get the answer. It'll tell you how you should think about this and what you should do. And I think there's like an aching for that, and I think that is part of the draw.
I think to add on to it gives folk a way out, right? Because of we can't find anybody to put into these roles kind of comments. But I think on top of that, it's also easier for folk to hear criticisms from folk they can identify with more. And so if this was like native actors and characters pointing these things out, they may not feel as comfortable to the audience to hear. Even though they're uncomfortable, they may feel a little bit more uncomfortable if the three of us were up here pointing it out or something like that. Not that I'm an actor, but I appreciate that there's people that can act these scenes out. But I think that's intentional, and part of it too is the comfort level of the audience to hear these truths being presented. Because a lot of times when Indigenous people speak up about the Thanksgiving myth or the impacts of it, even not just the inaccuracies of it, but she brought up a lot of the impact pieces too. It's kind of looked at as like, oh, you've been kind of sensitive, or I don't know, are you sure, and stuff like that. So I think that was intentional too, of knowing who the audience would be.
One quick thing I want to slip in is the production that I saw in Portland was done in April. So I jokingly said, you don't have to do this play in November.
But we did.
We did.
All right, audience, I'm going to come down and make a microphone available to you. If you want to raise your hand, if you have a question for all these wonderful human beings. Anybody? Question? Rachel, can you ask questions so that we have one question? Can you do that for me? Well, you have the 10 seconds I'm walking across the room to make one up.
What a meanie.
Wow.
Right? I know.
All right, Robert.
Uh-oh.
Where
wonderful truths that I so much enjoyed with the way that you presented for it. Dramaturgy. The dramaturgy part is obviously hilarious because I am a dramaturg. But where does dramaturgy fit into this kind of process? And do you think that it is important in the way that we sourced from our own wonderful community? What is the role of a dramaturg in doing that in the larger theaters who actually have dramaturgs to do that? And do you think that some of these theaters, especially like Portland Rec and OSF, who are doing all of this work, do they have native dramaturgs working on this stuff? Do you know?
I don't know for sure. I'd have to go back and look at my program.
Yeah.
But I think for me, what I did is I did a lot of research looking at, I wanted to familiarize myself with other works by Larissa FastHorse and other Native playwrights, and also reading some historical books. One that doesn't really touch on this play but gave me a great insight is David Troyer's book, The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, which is really a terrific book. And then there's a new, and he's Ojibwe. And then I looked at another book called This Land Is Their Land, which is about the Thanksgiving story. But it's written by a white academic. And he consulted the Wampanoags. I also looked for any videos about the Wampanoags or Wampanoag. So I was familiar with that I really wanted to know. And I do that with any play, but particularly this one.
Any other questions, wonderful audience?
I do actually have one. Alright, so some of the funny bits of this play came from this idea of like, oh no, we can't show children that. We can't show children. We can't talk about this real thing with children. We talk about the Holocaust with very young children in schools, and I'm wondering why you all think that we don't approach this subject matter in the same way that the Holocaust is approached. Because, we know that's excellent.
With that, I think that there is an aspect of how home it is that nobody wants to acknowledge it, because with that, there is a lot of hero worship on ourselves that goes into the World Wars and the Holocaust, because it's like, well, we helped them win, we did that, we saved them. But with that, there's trouble, I think, when it comes to facing hey, we did that. Look home for that one. That's my answer.
Wonderful OSU folks. Thoughts on why we don't teach Native American genocide the same way we teach the Holocaust?
I mean, it's documented that Hitler got a lot of his ideas from how the U.S. treated Native people, so that would be omitting a whole lot on the part of the settler state in that context. And also, it's hard for people to grapple with that and understand that a lot of folk are still benefiting from what happened, or not a lot of people, everybody actually is, except for Indigenous folk, and depending on where we lived, we're also benefiting from displacement, right? Originally my people aren't from here, but the Kalapuya people are from here, but they were removed so we can be here in this theater. So there's a lot to unpack, and I think it's hard for people to face that. And I was just talking with one of my kids about the U.S. involvement in genocide in other countries besides the U.S., and it's something that people do not like to talk about, and that's not ancient history. It's really recent and it's ongoing, and so it kind of messes with that saviorship image that the U.S. has of itself.
Exactly. And I don't want to repeat what you just said. Also, removals. People were removed, out of sight, out of mind. All the secrets are kept. And now they're starting to come out. And I think what comes to mind is that when you remove people and confederate them, and as Parkman did, he sanitized us as individual tribes with individual cultures and individual languages. And the United States government knew that our languages were our culture, and our culture was landscape management and resources and doing all the things that we did to survive for millennia. If we can move them off the land they're familiar with, then they will no longer cease to exist. But again, Hitler, a lot of his tactics for what he used against the Jewish people were taken directly from our boarding school societies here.
So why don't we teach this? A lot of people don't know the history. It's painful. The other thing I wonder, this is what I really was going to say, is this play was written first produced in 2018. I wonder if, not that she has to, but if she was writing the play, if Larissa was writing the play today, would school boards be mentioned anywhere in the play? You know, we don't want, you know, all over. I mean, look at Albany. I'm sure there are people in Corvallis too who, you know, we don't want to teach this because this will upset white kids. And, you know, okay, but I would ask, well, what about the non-white kids in the school? Wouldn't they feel upset about what you're teaching or not teaching? So, you know, that is what I wonder how she would teach, how she would write the play today.
Any other questions?
Hey, Jimbo, I'll add in too real quick that in Oregon, Senate Bill 13 was passed that the Oregon tribes really helped with the curriculum. And so that's like a state law now that tribal histories, specifically local tribal histories, are taught, and it's a huge step for public education to start learning about some of these things earlier. And it's really exciting to see that happen, and hopefully those lesson plans are taken seriously. What I've seen happen in the past in some areas is they didn't use the lesson plans, but said that they would use the lesson plans. Not as naming anybody in particular, because my kids have been to several school districts, I'll just say that. But it's nice that Senate Bill 13 passed along with the ethnic studies bill to help some of that happen. One of the things that I hear a lot from students in my classes is they feel betrayed by their public education, and I'm looking forward to the day when they don't say that, or when they get to college the first time that they've heard some of this stuff. And I don't think ethnic studies or WGS's job will be done ever, but it'll be nice when students don't feel betrayed by their education. And like, why didn't I know about this? And a lot of times students of color, and especially Indigenous students, understand what's happening as they grow up. I'm not gonna say every single person, of course, because we're all different, but we live with these histories, we live with the impacts of it every day. And so it's not like we can hide from these truths because we live them. And so if our kids are learning about this from the very beginning, all kids can be able to learn from it.
Thank you, Lou. Any other questions, y'all? All right, well, thank you so much to our panelists and our actors and our director and the crew for sticking with us. And thank you so much for staying and being a part of this important context that informs the wonderful work that we've seen. And have a wonderful evening.